The bell for lunch had just rung, filling the halls of Oak Ridge High with its usual noisy chaos. In her bright art room, the teacher was wiping down tables, her own colorful bracelets clinking softly as she worked. She loved this quiet moment after the morning classes. But today, the peace didn't last out through the open door. She heard a sound that didn't belong with the laughter and locker slams. It was a muffled, hitched sob, the kind someone tries very hard to keep inside. She stepped into the hallway and saw her student, a quiet girl from her third period class, pressed against a row of lockers. The girl was trying to be invisible, her face turned to the steel door, but her shoulders were shaking. A group of older students was walking away, their loud jokes echoing. One of them glanced back, snickering, and the art teacher felt a hot spark of anger in her chest. She pushed it down. Right now, the student needed her calm, not her fury. "Hey," the teacher said, her voice gentle as she walked over. "What's going on?" The girl turned, and the teacher's heart sank. The young girl's eyes were red and swimming with tears. But worse was her hair. It was long and usually fell in a simple ponytail. Now, a huge sticky wad of pink bubble gum was smashed right into the back of it, tangled deep in the strands. Someone had clearly put it there on purpose. "Oh, honey," the teacher sighed, her voice full of sympathy. "Come with me. Let's get you sorted out." She led the trembling student past curious stares into the empty teacher's lounge. She sat her down in a chair by the sink. The girl kept her head bowed, the weight of her humiliation almost physical. "Look at me," the teacher said softly. "This is not your fault. Someone did a cruel, stupid thing. You have nothing to be ashamed of." The girl nodded, a fresh tear rolling down her cheek. "It happened at breakfast. I didn't see who, and I can't get it out. I tried." The teacher examined the mess. It was bad. The gum had been ground in, trapping a thick knot of hair. Pulling it would hurt terribly. The usual solutions, ice, peanut butter, weren't going to work on something this big and tangled. "We need to cut it out," the teacher said, thinking out loud. The girl's eyes went wide with panic. "My mom, she can't afford a salon. She tries so hard. She'll be so upset." In that moment, the teacher understood more. This wasn't just about gum. It was about a family stretched thin, about a mother's love and a daughter not wanting to be one more burden. It was about pride. "Your mom loves you," the teacher said firmly, "and she would want you not to be in pain. But we don't have to cut it all." An idea formed. She rummaged in the art room supply closet and came back with a pair of sharp fabric scissors, the kind used for cutting canvases. They were clean and precise. "What if we just cut the part with the gum? We can even it out. I can give you a nice bob. It'll be cute, I promise. Do you trust me?" The girl looked from the scissors to her teacher's kind, determined face. She took a shaky breath and gave a small nod. "Okay." Working carefully, the teacher first isolated the gummed-up section. With a few soft snips, the nasty pink wad, with its trapped hair, fell into the trash. The girl let out a sigh of relief, as if a physical weight had been removed. But now she had a jagged chunk missing from the back. "Now let's make it look like a choice, not an accident," the teacher said, her artist's eye taking over. She combed through the rest of the girl's hair. It was fine and straight. Gently, she began to cut, section by section, bringing the length up to her shoulders, carefully shaping it around her face. She talked as she worked, about simple things, about an upcoming project in class, about the funny painting a student had made, anything to keep the girl calm and distracted. After about 20 minutes, she put the scissors down. "Ready?" She handed the girl a small mirror. The student turned her head to see the back, then looked at her reflection straight on. She stared. The ragged, gum-filled mess was gone. In its place was a clean, shoulder-length haircut. It was simple, but it was neat. It was stylish. It framed her young face, making her eyes look bigger. The change was more than just hair. The shame that had hunched her shoulders was gone. She sat up straight. A real wobbly smile touched her lips. I look nice," she whispered, almost surprised. "You look beautiful," the teacher said, meaning it. "And you look strong." She helped clean up the stray hairs and gave the girl a hug. For the rest of the lunch period, the student stayed in the lounge, eating the sandwich the teacher shared with her. A new lightness in her demeanor. When the final bell rang, the teacher called the girl's mother. She explained everything, her voice full of care. On the other end of the line, there was a silence and the sound of soft crying. But they were tears of gratitude. "Thank you," the mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "For seeing her. For helping her when I couldn't be there." The teacher hung up, feeling a warm glow. She had solved a problem. She had helped the child find her smile again. It felt like the most important thing she had done all year. She had no idea that her simple act of scissors and kindness had just started a storm she never saw coming. All she knew was that one of her students was safe, and for now, that was enough. She walked back to her art room, ready to face the afternoon, completely unaware of the trouble that was already brewing in the quiet offices of the school administration. For a few days, everything felt normal. The teacher saw the student in class, now sitting a little taller, sometimes even raising her hand. The new haircut seemed to have given her a quiet kind of confidence. The teacher felt that warm, solid feeling you get when you know you've done the right thing. It was a private victory, a small fire she kept glowing inside her chest. But trouble, when it came, didn't arrive with a shout. It came in a polite, dry email from the school office, asking her to see the principal at the end of the day. She figured it was about the upcoming art show. She was wrong. The principal's office was always too warm, and that day was no different. The principal, a man who usually had a tired smile, looked grim. Sitting across from him was a woman from the school district office, her suit crisp, her face unreadable. "Thank you for coming," the principal began, not meeting her eyes directly. "We need to discuss an incident involving a student last week." The haircut. The teacher felt a flutter of confusion. "Oh, yes. I called the mother right after." She was very thankful. The girl was being bullied. It was gum. The woman from the district office cut in, her voice smooth and firm. "We've spoken to the parent. That's not the primary concern. The concern is that you used scissors on a minor student. You altered her physical appearance without prior written parental consent." The words hung in the warm air. They sounded so cold, so legal, so completely separate from the crying girl in the teacher's lounge. "I was helping her," the teacher said, her own voice sounding small. She was humiliated. It was an emergency. The district policy on student safety and physical contact is very clear, the woman continued, sliding a sheet of paper across the desk. It states that staff shall not perform any procedure that alters a student's physical appearance. Gum removal is one thing. Cutting hair is another. It's a liability. The principal finally looked at her, his expression pained. "We've had a formal complaint. Not from the girl's mother, but from another parent who heard about it. They're calling it assault, an overreach of authority." The word assault hit the teacher like a physical blow. Her act of care reframed as violence. It made her feel sick. "What happens now?" she asked, her throat tight. "The district is recommending a suspension," the woman said, "without pay, pending a full review, which will recommend to the state board whether your teaching license should be revoked." The world seemed to narrow. The warm office walls felt like they were closing in. Her license, her career, everything she'd worked for, gone? Because she cut gum out of a child's hair? The meeting ended in a blur. She was told to go home, to wait for the official letter. She walked out of the school, the late afternoon sun feeling strangely harsh. In her car, she finally let the tears come hot, angry tears of disbelief dotted home. Her family saw her shattered face. Her father, a man who had spent his life in a courtroom, listened quietly as she told the story again, her voice breaking. He sat in his favorite armchair, his hands steepled. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was silent for a long minute. "They're scared," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "Scared? Of me? No," he said. "Scared of the lawsuit that never happened. Scared of the angry phone call from a parent with a lawyer. They are following the rule book to protect the system, not the people in it." He leaned forward, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, locking onto hers. "They are making an example of you, to show they are in control. But sometimes the law needs a reminder of its own purpose." "What can I do?" she whispered, feeling helpless. "You fight," he said simply. "There will be a school board hearing. You will tell your story. All of it. Not about policy, but about the girl. You speak about her tears, her shame, and her smile when she saw her new hair. You make them see the human being, not the rule book entry." He stood up, a familiar fire in his gaze she hadn't seen since his retirement. "And I will be there." Meanwhile, the story had leaked. It was in the local paper the next day, but the headline was all wrong. It read, "Teacher Under Fire for Cutting Student's Hair." The article was full of quotes from the concerned parent and dry statements from the district about safety protocols. There was one line about the gum, and nothing about the bullying or the mother's gratitude. The teacher's heart sank as she read it. Her private act of kindness had been turned into a public scandal. Her friends, other teachers, were fiercely supportive, but also afraid. They brought her meals and sent texts, but they whispered in the hallways, worried they could be next for breaking a rule they didn't know existed. The student she helped was now quieter than ever, carrying a different kind of weight, the fear that she had caused all this trouble. The official letter arrived, thick and heavy. It confirmed the suspension without pay and detailed the date for the school board hearing, where her fate would be decided. It felt like a court summons. She spent her days preparing, writing down what she would say, but the words felt flat on the page. How could she translate that moment in the lounge, the smell of soap, the sound of the scissors, the girl's fragile smile, into something a board of officials would understand? The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She looked at the art projects from her students, still scattered around her living room, symbols of the job she loved and was now in danger of losing. Her father found her sitting in the dark. "Remember," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder, "you are not on trial for cruelty. You are being questioned for compassion. That is a very different thing. Now get some rest. Tomorrow, you tell the truth. The whole, simple, human truth." As he walked away, she felt a flicker of the old warmth in her chest. The fire wasn't out yet. It was just waiting. Tomorrow, she would have to find out if the truth was still enough. The school board meeting was held in the district's main building, in a room that felt like it was designed to make people feel small. The walls were a pale, dull green. The chairs for the public were hard plastic, lined up in perfect rows. At the front, on a raised platform behind a long wooden bench, sat the 5 members of the school board. They had nameplates and glasses of water in front of them, looking solemn and official. The room was packed. There were teachers from her school, their faces tight with worry. There were parents she didn't know, curious or angry. And in the very back, sitting perfectly still, was the girl from her art class, with her mother's arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Seeing them, there made the teacher's stomach twist. They shouldn't have had to come to this. She sat at a small table facing the board, her hands clasped in her lap to keep them from shaking. The district woman who had been in the principal's office was also there with a neat stack of papers. The hearing began. The head of the board, a woman with a stern expression, read out the formal charges. The words were long and legal. Violation of professional boundaries. Failure to adhere to district policy regarding student physical integrity. They sounded like they were describing a stranger. Some reckless person, not her. Then it was her turn to speak. She stood up, her legs feeling weak. She had practiced what to say, but the papers in her hand seemed useless now. So she just started from the beginning. She told them about the sound of crying in the hallway. She described the look on the girl's face, the sticky pink mess in her hair, the way her shoulders had hunched with shame. She spoke quietly, her voice filling the silent room. "I didn't see a policy number in that moment," she said, looking at the board members. "I saw a child who was hurting. I saw a problem I could actually fix. Her mother was at work, miles away. What was I supposed to do? Leave her like that for hours?" The gum wasn't just in her hair. It was all over her spirit. She talked about the call to the mother, the relief in the woman's voice. She finished by saying, "I became a teacher to help students feel safe and seen. That day, I believed I did exactly that." When she sat down, there was a heavy silence. A few people in the audience nodded, but the faces of the board members were hard to read. They were not moved. They were considering. Then the district woman stood. She talked about the importance of rules, of boundaries that protect everyone. "If every teacher acted on their personal idea of what is right, we would have chaos," she said firmly. "We have procedures for a reason. We must think of the precedent this sets." She made it sound so reasonable, so logical. The teacher felt her hope starting to sink. Her story of a single kind act was being buried under words like liability and precedent. The head of the board asked if there was anyone from the public who wished to speak. The girl's mother stood up, her face pale but determined. "She helped my girl," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "She showed her more kindness in that 1 hour than those kids showed her all year. Please don't punish her for that." She sat back down, pulling her daughter close. But a man, the parent who had made the formal complaint, also stood. He spoke loudly about safety and the dangers of teachers taking liberties. "Where does it stop?" he demanded. This was a clear overstep. The teacher watched it all, feeling detached, like she was watching a play about someone else's life. The board members whispered among themselves. The head of the board cleared her throat. "This is a difficult matter," she began, her tone suggesting they were about to wrap things up. "While we appreciate the human element described, the policy is clear for the protection of all. We must consider the districts." The door at the back of the room opened with a soft click. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was the teacher's father. He was not in his old judge's robes, but in a dark, impeccable suit. He stood very straight, his white hair combed back. He had a presence that immediately changed the air in the room. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, quiet authority. The murmuring stopped completely. He didn't rush. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his shoes making a soft, steady sound on the floor. He didn't go to the public seats. He walked right up to the front and stood beside his daughter's table. He gave her a small, almost invisible nod, then turned to face the school board. "Madam Chair, members of the board," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner, calm and clear. "Forgive my interruption. My name is Anthony Rossi. I am, as you know, this teacher's father. But for 35 years, I served as a judge in this county's circuit court. I have presided over cases of genuine harm and genuine mercy. And with your permission, I would like to offer a perspective, not as a family member, but as someone who has spent a lifetime interpreting the intent of rules. The head of the board was stunned into silence, then gave a curt nod. He placed his hands lightly on the back of his daughter's empty chair. You have heard the letter of the policy. It is a good policy. Its intent is to prevent true harm, to stop a reckless haircut on a whim, to prevent a tattoo, to uphold safety. Its spirit is protection. He paused, letting his eyes move slowly from one board member to the next. But in my courtroom, he continued, we had a concept called judicial discretion. It is the understanding that no rule, however well written, can foresee every human situation. That is why we have judges to apply wisdom, to weigh intent, to understand context. He gestured toward his daughter. You are not a court of law, but you are a court of morality for this community. You are asked to judge intent. Was the intent here to harm, to disobey, to rebel? Or was it to alleviate suffering that was right in front of her? He leaned forward slightly. You have the power of discretion today. You can hide behind the strict letter of the rule and make a devastating example of a compassionate teacher. Or you can look at the facts, a child in distress, a mother grateful, no harm caused, and a lesson in kindness actually delivered. You can choose to uphold the spirit of your own rules, the spirit of protecting children, which is exactly what she did. He stopped talking. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't pleaded. He had simply reframed the entire debate from a black and white policy violation to a test of human judgment. Thank you for your time, he said quietly. And with that, he turned and walked back up the aisle, taking a seat in the front row of the public section. He did not look at his daughter. He stared straight ahead at the school board, his gaze steady and patient. The head of the board blinked, her earlier certainty gone. She looked at her colleagues, who were now shifting in their seats, avoiding each other's eyes. The simple, powerful question hung in the air, changing everything. The teacher, sitting at her small table, felt a single tear escape, tracing a warm path down her cheek. It wasn't from fear anymore. It was from a sudden, fierce surge of hope. Her father had not asked them to break the rules. He had asked them to be wise. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she saw a crack in the wall, and a little light shone through. The silence after the father spoke lasted for only a few seconds, but in that room, it felt like an hour. You could see the change on the faces of the school board members. Before, they had the closed-off look of people following a script. Now they looked uneasy, thoughtful. The head of the board cleared her throat, but the sound was less confident than before. We will take a short recess to deliberate, she announced, her voice not as firm. The board members stood up and filed out through a side door, leaving a buzz of whispers to fill the room. The teacher let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her father, still sitting in the front row, gave her a small, slow nod. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was too early for that, but it was a nod that said, "We have been heard." People around her started talking in low, excited voices. A fellow teacher leaned over and squeezed her arm. "Your dad." "Wow," she whispered. But the district woman who had argued so firmly for the suspension was gathering her papers, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked stressed, glancing at the side door where the board had disappeared. This wasn't going the way she had planned. In the hallway, during the recess, a small miracle happened. The district's own lawyer, a man who had been sitting quietly beside the stern woman all along, approached the teacher and her father. He was a middle-aged man with a tired but sharp face. "Judge Rossi," he said, extending a hand. The father shook it. That was a compelling argument. It was the truth, the father replied simply. The lawyer nodded, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. He lowered his voice. Off the record? This is a public relations disaster for the district waiting to happen. That article in the paper was bad enough. But if the board votes to punish her after what you just said, the next headline will be, School Board Punishes Kindness. The public is already turning. He rubbed his forehead. I'm here to protect the district. And right now, the biggest risk isn't that teacher. It's the district looking heartless and stupid. The teacher listened, a mix of anger and hope swirling inside her. Her job, her passion, was being discussed like a math problem about risk and reputation. But at least now, someone was seeing the problem. Her father understood the language the lawyer was speaking. So, what is the solution that protects the district? He asked, his tone neutral. The lawyer thought for a moment. The suspension, the license revocation. It's too heavy. It looks like an overreaction. But we can't just drop it. It would look like we have no rules. He looked at the teacher. Your heart was in the right place, but you did break a technical rule. There has to be some accountability, or every parent with a complaint will quote this case. He was talking about finding a middle ground. A way out. What if, the father said slowly, thinking it through, the rule itself is the problem? What if the policy is too blunt and doesn't allow for a teacher to use common sense in a real emergency? A light went on in the lawyer's eyes. It was a way to turn a loss into a win for everyone. A policy review, he said. We form a committee to amend the student welfare policy. We add a clause, a Good Samaritan clause for lack of a better term. It allows for reasonable intervention to prevent immediate student distress, with immediate notification to parents and a report to the office. We call it a protocol. He looked from the father to the teacher. If we propose that, and if she accepts a formal written reprimand in her file for not following the old procedure instead of a suspension, the board might go for it. She keeps her job, her license. The district shows it can learn and adapt. We turn this from a scandal into a story of improvement. The teacher felt dizzy. It was all so clinical, but it was a lifeline. A written reprimand was a piece of paper. A suspension without pay was her livelihood. And the committee? She asked. You'd be on it, the lawyer said. And, with his experience, perhaps Judge Rossi would advise? We need to get the language right. The father looked at his daughter. This was her fight, her career. She was the one who had to live with the outcome. She saw the hope in his eyes, but also the question. Was this compromise a victory? Or was it just surrender dressed up nicely? She thought of the girl, waiting in the meeting room. She thought of her classroom, her students. She didn't need to be a martyr. She needed to be a teacher again. And if she could help change a dumb rule so that no other teacher or student would have to go through this, that was a real win. Okay, she said, her voice firm for the first time all day. Okay, let's try. The lawyer gave a quick, relieved nod and hurried off to find the head of the board before the recess ended. When the board members returned and took their seats, the atmosphere had shifted again. The head of the board conferred in whispers with the district lawyer, who was now standing beside her. They talked quickly, their heads closed together. Finally, the head of the board addressed the room. After further consideration, she began, and in light of the complex circumstances, the board is prepared to offer a revised resolution. She outlined the plan, the withdrawal of the suspension and license action, replaced by a formal written reprimand, and the formation of a committee to draft a new, more flexible protocol for student welfare interventions, with the teacher and her father as part of the process. A murmur of surprise and approval rippled through the crowd. The teacher saw the girl's mother put her face in her hands, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all night. The board took a vote. It was not unanimous. One member, the one who agreed most with the complaining parent, voted no. But the rest raised their hands in agreement. It was done. After the meeting, people came up to her teachers, a few parents, even a reporter who now wanted to hear the real story. But she only had eyes for her father. She walked over to him, and without a word, she hugged him tightly. He held her, patting her back gently, the way he had when she was a little girl. "You did the hard part, Ellie," he murmured. "You told the truth. I just translated it for them." As they walked out of the building into the cool night air, she felt exhausted, but lighter. The crushing weight was gone. She wasn't fired. She could go back to her students. But as she drove home, she realized the real work was just beginning. She had to go back into that school, face the stairs, and help build this new protocol. She had to make sure this painful experience meant something more than just a line in her file. The battle in the meeting room was over. Now, the work of fixing the problem had to start. The first morning back was the hardest. Walking into the school building, the teacher felt every eye on her. The whispers that had once been behind her back were now just quiet pauses in the hallway. Some looks were full of sympathy, others of curiosity, a few of lingering judgment. She kept her chin up, clutching her coffee like a shield, and walked straight to her art room. The door was closed. She took a deep breath and pushed it open. A sound hit her, not a roar, but a warm, steady wave of it, clapping. Every one of her students from her first period class was standing by their desks, smiling, their hands coming together in a rhythm that filled the bright, sunlit room. At the front, holding a small, lopsided potted plant with a bright ribbon, stood the girl. Her hair was still in that neat bob, and she was beaming. No one said a big speech. The girl just stepped forward, her face pink with shy pride. "We're glad you're back," she said, her voice clear and strong. She handed over the plant. The teacher took it, her own eyes suddenly stinging. All she could manage was a whispered, "Thank you. All of you. Now sit down, you lot. We've got art to make." And just like that, they did. The world snapped back into its familiar shape, the smell of clay and paint, the rustle of paper, the quiet chatter as they worked. It was normal. It was everything she had fought for. But outside that room, the real changes were starting. The committee the lawyer had promised became a real thing. They met in the school library after hours. The teacher, her father, the district lawyer, 2 sensible teachers, and even the principal. For the first meeting, the teacher was nervous. These were the same people who had been on opposite sides of a battle. Her father, however, knew how to build a bridge. He didn't come in as a judge or a critic. He came in as a helper. "We're not here to assign blame," he started, his voice calm and welcoming. "We're here to write a better rule. A rule that trusts the good hearts of teachers, but also keeps everyone safe." They talked for hours. The teacher told them, in simple terms, about that moment in the lounge, the feeling of having to choose between a cold rule and a crying child. The other teachers shared their own stories. Times they'd tied a shoe, cleaned a scraped knee, or given a hungry student their lunch, always with a flicker of worry about liability. The district lawyer, it turned out, had kids of his own. "I get it," he said, surprising everyone. The old policy was a shield. But sometimes you need a shield that can also bend, so you can actually reach out and help someone. Slowly, word by word, they built the new protocol. They called it the Student Welfare Intervention Guideline. It said that if a student was in immediate physical or severe emotional distress, a teacher could take reasonable steps to help. They had to notify a school administrator right away, and call the parent or guardian immediately after. Then they had to fill out a simple form explaining what they did and why. It wasn't about asking permission first in an emergency. It was about explaining the good reasons after. It's about common sense, her father said, looking over the final draft. And accountability for the right things. Not for helping, but for documenting that you helped. The school board approved it unanimously. The local paper, which had once printed that harsh headline, now ran a new story. District turns crisis into compassion. New policy empowers teachers to act. They even interviewed the girl's mother, who said she slept better knowing kind adults at the school could help her child without fear. For the teacher, the victory wasn't just in the new rules. It was in the small things. She saw a young teacher in the hall, confidently helping a student who had spilled juice all over their shirt, without looking over her shoulder first. The principal started using words like compassion and judgment in staff meetings, not just compliance. And the girl? She began to blossom. She started an anti-bullying club with a few friends, making posters that said, "Kindness is always in style." She didn't just become a student who was helped. She became a student who helped others. The teacher watched her lead meetings, her voice steady. The terrible day with the gum transformed into a source of strength. That was the greatest artwork she'd ever seen emerge from her classroom. One afternoon, near the end of the school year, her father stopped by the school. He wanted to see the famous art room. She showed him the messy shelves, the students' work drying on racks, a view of the football field from the window. He stood quietly for a moment, taking it all in. "This is the real courtroom," he said finally. "This is where the future gets shaped. Not by verdicts, but by moments." She nodded, leaning against a paint-stained table. "I was so angry at them. At the system." "I know," he said. "And you had a right to be. But sometimes, people in a system just need someone to show them a door they didn't see was there. We didn't break down their walls. We just helped them build a better door." He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "You know, I spent 35 years trying to bring justice into a room. You," he said, with a soft, proud smile, "you bring it into a heart. That's harder. And better." He left, and she was alone in her quiet room. She looked at the little potted plant from her first day back. It was thriving, putting out new green leaves. She thought about the year, the fear, the fight, the long nights of worry, and now this peace. The final bell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. The sounds of students rushing into the hallway filled the air. She smiled, took a deep breath, and walked to her open door, ready to face the joyful, messy, human tide of her students. The storm was over. The lesson, for everyone, had been learned. And her classroom, once again, was just a classroom, a place where the most important things were not rules on paper, but the people within them.